You know, I'll do my own. I'll do my own version of Hartnell here for you.
You look more like one of the robbers from Home Alone.
Oi.
Hello everyone, welcome to Talking About Who. It's season 2. This is part 3 of 4 of series 2. There we go, look, I did all the fingers. I am Paul or P-Bal, and joining me as ever are...
Hello, it's James.
Hello, it's Jason.
We're sure it's James. It could be a stunt double, it could be a robot. No, that's a bit later on, isn't it? We don't know.
He looks like a fifth generation VHS video copy of his own story.
It's quite possible.
Sounds too good though, isn't it? It's all that sort of turn it up, then there'll be a thump, a bit, whoa!
Blow the speakers out.
Don't forget, boys and girls at home, to like and subscribe. Like and subscribe, share. Otherwise you might miss some of our wisdom and doubt. They agree with me, even if nobody else will. On our previous endeavours for series 2, I'm calling it series 2, it's season 2. I mean, it's just, I'm quite old and tired. Season 2. Our current bottom of the pile is the Planet of Giants on 17, followed by The Rescue on 20.5, and our top 2 are Dalek Invasion of Earth and The Romans, both on 23.5. But we have got 3 stories today. 5 in total left, 3 today. It's all to play for. And first of all, we're taking a trip to Vortex with the Web Planet. Now, traditionally, I would waggle my hardback at this point.
We were waiting for that.
And actually, once again, I mean, I'm not advocating people going to, just ask mum and dad. They'd probably sell them too much if you ask them nicely. But my Doctor Who and the Zarbi is at Mum and Dad's, and also it's got Tom Baker on the front.
Oh no, you haven't got that one, have you?
Yeah, it's it's one of those bizarre library editions where you got Tom Baker and the Zarbi, or Tom Baker. It's like, as a kid, I really hated that, and now it's worth something. I'm glad I didn't just junk that. But as a kid, I was like, this is stupid. He's not the Doctor in this. What are they playing at?
And it's not even a particularly good likeness of him either.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. It's pretty rough. But anyway, talking of pretty rough, which one of you two is going to introduce the Web Planet?
Well, I think it's got to go to James, because look at his fabulous Web Planet background here.
Well, it's funny. we were talking about this just a moment ago, and my intro was to quote Kate Bush, to say he's too busy hitting the Vaseline, and with reference to the visual for this episode. So you're absolutely right. We're off to Vortis for what I would describe as an ambitious sort of story. But, and I think we mentioned this on the last recording, some of the ambition throughout this series doesn't quite reach where it's meant to be going. And so we have this sort of showdown, if you like, between the sort of insect races, the Zarbi and the Menoptera, and some very interesting costumes and blurry effects.
Oh, you missed out the Optera.
Oh yes, there's a couple of other weird things, like the gun that looks like a shredder. Looks like paper shredding is coming out the side of it. There's some weird and wonderful images. You've got the villain, who basically is just a hairdryer that comes down over Hartnell and talks to him. It's some really weird stuff going on in here. Yeah.
It is. I agree with you, actually. Ambition that they just couldn't quite make it work, however hard they tried on this one. And you've got to admire what they were trying to achieve, I think. The script in itself, for me, is a little overlong. And this is a great and perfect example of how 6-part stories at times really don't work. but it's just dogged by, you can just tell it's just dogged by overambitious production attempts. And Richard Martin did a fantastic job, I feel, with what he had to work with for Dalek Invasion of Earth. But this one just feels like it was just a step too far. I mean, yeah, the effect of the lens on the camera and all that sort of thing is all well documented now. But they got some fabulous opportunities to film at Ealing for this, and there's some ambitious shots of Menoptera flying around, and the Zabi costume in itself is significantly well designed by Shawcraft. There's so many good things, but it feels just a bit like there's too much going on, and there isn't any kind of story underneath this to support those fabulous visuals they're trying to create.
Oh, there is a story. I mean, the story is slightly convoluted. It's the animus has taken over and affected the natural order of life, hasn't it? I suppose it's a play on, if you take an ant out of its surroundings, put it in a box and make it, it's all that sort of stuff. It's sort of, I sort of get it. Some of the other bits probably not quite as sensible, like the invasion force coming in and all that stuff. Code word electron is a catchphrase for our times. I know. I don't think it fails on ambition. I think when that script came in, it must have been a kind of, okay, so everybody's an insect or appropriation of an insect, apart from the series regulars, and we've got to set it on an alien planet, and it's kind of like, it would be a lot cheaper to do it in an office block and have a warehouse. There's kind of, I like the fact that nobody sort of went, no, this isn't something we can do. They all go wholeheartedly at it. And I also, we always talk about context, but I think kids would have been watching it on a screen about that big or something. I mean, it would have been a small, flickery old screen. So we're horrendously unforgiving, and I don't mean us personally. I mean, as a society now, we see something like this and go, crikey, look at the crap wings, or it looks awful on our 68-inch HD TV. What's the problem here? It's like, but it would have been such a small flickery thing in the corner of the room, and I think it would have just looked, with the imagination and the visual, it would have been a lot more magical than it looks now in 2022.
I mean, they got in, I think it's Rosalind de Winter, to do choreography, to do sort of
insect movement, not choreography.
Well, the mime and the way they move. So there was a lot of effort that went into this to make it look alien. And on the back of some of the previous stories, we've had the Daleks, we're going to have the Daleks again. The sort of wanting to do something different, wanting to do something equally as alien, but at the same time recognizable, because we saw a giant ant previously in one of the earlier episodes in Land of the Giants, but this is Bill Strutton based this on watching two bull ants fight when he was a kid, and so this is his interpretation of the insect world fighting against each other. There's a deeper context with the script. It's believed that it's, for example, the Menoptera are supposed to represent enterprise, sort of free economy, and the Zabi are supposed to be communism. But that doesn't come across so much because you're watching some very interesting movement in different costumes.
I mean, Ros was friends with Richard Martin, so she was casting it, and I suspect at rehearsal she was doing her insect movement. They went, you show everyone else how to do that. We'll give you an extra shilling a week and you have a credit for that. And I suspect that's probably how insect movement by Rosalind de Winter turned up, because she also is back for the chase when we get to that. But I think I admire it in so many ways, actually, because I was thinking about this when I was watching it. When you get a script through, I mean, I'm not an actor, I'm just very theatrical. If you get a script through and you're, even if you're a space villain and you've just got a white jumpsuit or something, you're still a person. There's still something to come out. But if you're underneath and they say, right, you're a space butterfly or you're a space underground woodlouse or something, you know, I think there's so much more that you've got to work with. And I mean, some people do better in this than others, and, you know, at different levels. But I think I admire that everyone has to have a tackle here at something that's completely unusual. I mean, there isn't. I don't think there's a story like this after ever in 60 years of Doctor Who. I don't think there's another story that goes this far out as this one does.
Of course, not only does she do the movement element of it, but I understand that she also came up with the speech for the Menoptera and the way that they announce their sort of their vowels and what have you. And I think she, if I'm correct, doesn't she play one of the Menoptera as well?
She sure does.
He does.
So, you know, she's almost like the lead Menoptera, if you like. But I think she tried to give the alien life that sort of alienness, and I think it actually did work. You know, unfortunately with the Zarbi costumes, there was very, very, very little that any of those poor Dalek operators pretty much could do with them. They looked very heavy. They were obviously quite clunky. Very well designed and a fabulous idea, but must have been an utter nightmare for them to be running around the studios in and bumping into cameras, as they quite often did.
They did. They were 8 foot. The Zarbi costumes were 8 foot. So you're right. It's a lot. You know, it's quite a minimalistic set in parts, but there are elements, like you say, where they trip over, and it can be quite unwielding, especially when you're doing the weird movement or flying across the set.
Although annoyingly tarted up for the DVD, I like my Zarbis banging. I don't need the sounds removing. It's like this is what it was.
Yeah, I'm not a fan when they remove bits, like they remove the van in the background on Dalek Invasion of Earth, and then you remove the bump out of this one. And to me, let's watch it exactly as it went out in the first place.
On a Saturday afternoon in 1965.
I must admit, I did have to have a couple of goes at trying to watch this, because it's not a story I can sit down and devour in the full 6 episodes glory. So I must admit, this was done in 3 2-episode chunks when I went back and did the rewatch on this, and it did make me think. Again, it goes back to what you said about it was being watched on a really small TV. You know, the audiences back in the 60s would have been watching this an episode at a time, and visually, you know, it would have been unlike many things that they'll have seen in Doctor Who up until that point. So you can see, I think, why, you know, viewing figures were on the up generally at this point in Doctor Who. But you know, this was a well-watched story. You know, a couple of these episodes were peaking up quite high. So, you know, it had the audience, and of course the Zarbi potentially being lined up as the next big bad. I mean, they tried to get the Vord to be the next big bad after the Daleks, and along came the Zarbi, and of course they were all over the place after that in sort of annuals and coloring books and all sorts of things. So they were, you know, there was a lot of, not only did they have the ambition of the story, but they were clearly looking for additional marketing opportunities. Because by this point, I'm only assuming that they were making quite a bit of money on Dalek merchandising.
They didn't want to share it with Terry. What can we get in here? The giant ants. Great, love it. Get the badges. Kids love the giant ants. There's a dog barking outside now. He also likes the giant ants. Yeah, it is funny, the merchandise, because you have that, and you get the stories, as you said, because some of those are now read on audio and stuff, aren't they? On BBC audio stuff. But you can't actually see that there's a much scope for bringing the Zarbi back. You know, they're not going to invade Gallifrey. Well, I say that now. Jodie's last story will probably be the Zarbi invading Gallifrey, and they'll be half Time Lord, half Zarbi, and her great granddad will be a Flux Zarbi or something. Anyway, But it is that weird thing. You can see that there's a we need, market, but you can't see what you do with the Zarbi if they came back for the series finale, because they apart from sort of cluttering around and stuff, they're just a bit kind of cute, aren't they? Kind of like a big sweet ant, and they're not scary. And I don't know whether kids. I mean, I wasn't a kid in 1965. I don't know whether kids found them scary. It seems slightly unlikely that they did in some ways, because they just sort of bumble about, even when they, to the extent when they have the one that they control themselves and stuff.
None of the monsters in this or none of the species of the planet, then let's say, were monstery or sort of evil in any way. It was really the animus that was the sort of driving force for the evil here. But you're right, there is a certain charm about them, isn't there?
It reminds me a little bit of going to see a local panto that doesn't have the budget of huge like Birmingham Hippodrome. So you've got there are points where you can almost see the regular cast wanting to help them in their costumes, or when the wings start sort of fluttering around, and I think one of them gets sort of stuck with his wing, and you can almost see the pity in the regular cast going, I'm so glad I'm not wearing that outfit, and sort of, come over here, we're in our next scene, let's just walk over here. It's quite bizarre. But
it is nice though when she lifts the wings and the wings come up, and I think that's actually nicely done. And also the bit before that where he has his wings ripped off, and you just get Barbara's reaction to that. And I think that's quite a horrific thing that sort of played out. I think it's when you go downstairs to the Opera. The Opera definitely the last costume to be made for this. I think everything else you can see there's been a bit of. The Opera just feel like they've gone, oh, what got to do woodlice as well. All right. Any other insects? You're going to have 3 woodlice and that's your lot. Because they have that little hopping thing as well, don't they? Which is a bit awkward.
And the one Opera's voice is it's very odd, isn't it? The delivery of the one Opera is like, there's something not quite right with the delivery. But it almost feels like the Opera were sort of tacked in at the last minute. It almost feels like we got to the episode 4 and they don't, Bill Strutton had sort of run out of ideas somewhere in his script, and he needed something else as an extra hook. And this story didn't need anything else. It had Menoptera, it had Zarbi, it had the things that run around on the floor with the zappy guns. It had the animus.
There were the lava guns, weren't they? The ones that looked like a paper shredder had grown legs.
But you always feel the Opera is one too many pieces of addition into the script.
Yeah, and I think, as is off the way with these situations, I think the build-up over 6 weeks to the resolution, which is very quick. All of a sudden, there's like, we've got this weapon that will just end the animus and we're all done. We can all go home. It does feel like the end is a bit of a, okay. And Doctor Who's astral map, I love. He has to have it cable. He has to have cable attached. Don't unplug it.
Don't unplug it, but it's okay because I can pull the wooden flap up on the one side of the astral map. It's a beautiful piece of invention, isn't it?
You get the never again seen Doctor's ring that opens the door as well.
The Doctor's ring is in all of these, Beatty. You see the Doctor's ring all the time.
You get to see what it actually does. It doesn't actually do anything other than drop to the floor a bit later on, and about 500 seasons later. But it's a cunning little plot device.
But having the map that had to be kept plugged in all the time, of course, that was allowing the wire on the floor to actually light the thing up when they needed to on the set.
I do like the cheeky interplay that the Menopterus quite fancies having the ring away, and he's like, you give me back on pain of death, you give me this back. And he's like, I like this ring. It's quite sweet, that is.
I quite like the way they separate Barbara using the gold bracelet that she got given in the Romans, because she's sort of pulled out, isn't she, by the bracelet, and then the TARDIS.
She ends up walking around like Jason.
Yeah.
Rude.
Is it Vicky's in the TARDIS as that's being dragged off in a different direction?
Oh, but there are some dodgy bits in this, though, aren't there, with that TARDIS, where they can't open the doors, but the doors open and close of their own volition. The TARDIS console spins round and round and round and round for absolutely no real reason at all. Why? And they're all affected. I mean, it's commonplace for the stories, I think, in this season to separate all the regulars. And I think it's more so apparent in this season that, that they're very quickly being, Ian's off having his adventure and Barbara's off having her adventure and so on and so forth. So I like that when they separate them up and put, bring the peril into it.
But this is another, we were talking in our last recording, this is another one where Barbara is a really strong character and saves the day, if you like. We see her develop more and more, taking a leading role in resolving the issues they find themselves in, which is really good. I like that. And I think you're right, when they separate them, you get to see more of the characters.
For me in this one, I don't think Maureen O'Brien gets perhaps as much as she really needs as Vicky. I think obviously, she's better utilized, I think, in other stories. And she always tends to sort of end up with the Doctor, but I think it's done much, much better in the story that follows this. But, Hartnell clearly on good form throughout this. And what was it with those coats? What was the point of the
had
coats?
to write it down because it was the atmospheric density jackets, which got ditched after one episode, I think it was.
There's a cosplay idea for you.
Do you think they were a bit too hot on the first week in studio? They're like, get rid.
Liam Russell had another coat on underneath it.
But he didn't have his tie, did he? I like the effect when he has the tie in the acid. I like that. That's almost sort of nod back to Keys of Marinus, isn't it? I think the acid thing. The other thing I was going to sort of say is that I appreciate the soundscape of this is very alien, but I do look with horror when I see the vinyl release and think, I'm not sure I could listen to the Web Planet as an audio. I don't think it is such a thing to watch the visuals with sound. We should be very thankful that we have got the visuals. I do look at that vinyl. I think I pity anyone who does actually open their vinyls, because who does that? But listening to the Web Planet must be quite monstrous.
Yeah, with all the sort of the insect noises and sometimes you've got the sort of echo on the planet's surface. Sometimes you haven't sort of got the echo on the planet's surface. Sometimes you've got the camera effect and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I would imagine this one probably is quite a difficult one to follow. And I think if we didn't have the visuals for this one, I think we actually would be quite robbed. I'm glad this exists, because if we were to sit and potentially be trying to imagine what this story was like, or we only had one episode of it or something like that, whilst it seems like I'm being slightly negative towards this story, it is one that I am very, very glad we have, because it's a great example of the ambition of the time. And as I said, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But, you've got to absolutely take your hats off to all the folks who really tried to put on something here that was completely different, never before seen it in an episode of Doctor Who up until that point.
Can you imagine what the animus would look like? Because if you didn't have any of the visuals, and they were like, there is this sort of all-powerful being that's sort of controlling them, but you don't actually see it. But if you were trying to animate it,
they'd animate it with really long arms, I suspect. I think that'd be how they'd animate it.
End up with like a giant ladybird or something else, some other insect.
The voice of the Animus by Catherine. I mean, Catherine Fleming was the voice artist behind the Animus, and it is quite a very powerful voiceover, I think, for what was quite a disappointing prop in the end, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think the end they are all sort of throwing themselves on the floor and trying to make this look like it's something that's a bit, you know, there's a lot of that end sequence is such a shame that it just doesn't pay off, I think, for everything that's sort of come before it. The ambition that it is a lot of people lying around and then just pointing a prop, and it's like, it's a shame. Do we have any exciting facts on Doctor Who and the Zarbi?
We have Peter Purves auditioned for this story as a Menoptera, but obviously he would later on return. They wanted to keep him for another story.
What's he come in as then? What does he come back as then?
I think he comes back as a Dalek in the chase.
I thought he was going to be a Quark.
You've got Martin Jarvis making an appearance in this one, who'd later go on to be in other story. Yeah, that's everything else we were talking about. Jason, you mentioned the costumes. They were designed by John Wood. They were made out of fiberglass. So again, that would have been horrendous under the lights. But yeah.
A typical Shawcraft build, though, I think, because obviously Shawcraft, they were fabulous engineers and they built some fabulous models, but some of their life-size setups with the costumes, I think, you know, the Daleks were a great win, but some of their following ones probably weren't quite as good. I mean, I go back to this one being, you know, an ambitious story, but I think this one in particular was a very difficult production throughout, and it shows at times, obviously, with some of the bits that went wrong. But interestingly, this is one of the few stories from the 60s that had so many episodes that overran in studio. And of course, as you know, back in the day, you didn't go after 10:30, you know, because they literally shut the lights out on you. If you haven't got it in the can, you haven't. But interestingly, the episode Escape to Danger overran its recording slot by 37 minutes. And that's some going back then. And the episode of the Zarbi, the episode 1, essentially, overran by 16 minutes. So there's a little bit of interesting fact for you.
Well, and just to say, because the shiny effect was 2 separate lenses that were laid on top of each other. A lot of people thought that it was Vaseline.
Oh no, you spoiled my illusion.
I know.
You're giving them a tip as to what he needs to put a filter on next week.
But they broke. So both lenses were smashed by the end of the recording, and they were quite expensive as well. So
I expect most of the cast ended up smashed at the end of the recording as well. Okay, so do we have some scores on the doors to Doctor Who and the Web Planet?
Yes, we do.
Do you want to hand them over?
Well, I'll make a start on this one. So ambitious is a word that we've used a number of times, and that's exactly what this story was. I don't think, as I've said already, the script delivers, and at 6 episodes, it's a bit long. But then if you've gone to the extent of having all these fabulous costumes built, you're going to want to use them to the best extent and stretch the budget over as many episodes as you can. I actually love the design of the Zarbi. The Menoptera are a great design as well. The TARDIS regulars are on form. But there's just something about this story that doesn't quite get off the ground from a writing perspective. So all ambition aside, it's just lacking a little bit for me. So I've given it some scores that reflect the ambition, but detract from the script. So the Web Planet's coming in at a 5.
Thank you. Thank you for your scores, Jason. Can we go to James now?
Hello, can you hear me?
It's been
yes.
a great show.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Jason just said.
Oh, get off the bloody recording.
doesn't happen that often. But I have to say, whenever I come in to watch this episode, and it is one that I've watched a number of times, when I start watching it, I think of all the costumes, think of all the things that they've tried to achieve in this story, and wish every time that it was slightly better, because I think it's sad that there hasn't been another story like this, in the rest of the sort of 50 years afterwards, that there hasn't been something that is as experimental as it was then. I know we've had some, probably, in the newer era, we've had some off the wall stories, but I think at that time, and I think you're right, when you were Paul, when you were talking about, they'll be watching on a small screen, and it would look different, and for kids in particular to see insects fighting. But there is just something about that ambition that just doesn't quite get there. All the elements are there, but I think it's unfortunately it's overrun. It doesn't warrant the 6 episodes. I think they struggled to find something for everybody to do, and like you say, Vicky kind of doesn't do a great deal. It's more, Barbara has quite a lot in this, which is great, and you can see we're building towards the end of that. But I scored it slightly higher at 5.5.
And double the commentary.
Well, I think it warrants it, because it's not just your standard run-of-the-mill episode. There's lots of things that they've tried to do, and if those had clicked into place, you could be talking a 9, an 8 or a 9, but it just doesn't, for whatever reason, and hence we don't see an episode like that again.
I'm going to come out with an exciting confession here. When I was 10 years old, I used to pretend I'd run my own TV station, and I'd do little repeat seasons and stuff. And I'd write down what day I'd watched the episode and what time, and give it like a rating. Seriously, this is true. And I did one run where I had the Web Planet in there, and I can remember, because I used to draw graphs afterwards to show, what got ratings and stuff. I mean, I was so cool. And I remember Web Planet being really it kept dropping. I hated it. And I can remember hating it at that age. And it was that awful sort of depression of 2 VHSs that you'd struggle through one and you'd know there was another one coming. So I've never really liked the Web Planet. But now in my dotage, I think I quite like it. I don't think it's amazing. It's not what I'm going to put on every week. But watching it for this, and again, watching it in the sequence of the others, and I think it's all part of season 2 being brave and bold. I quite enjoyed it, but it's still not going to be a classic for me. Do you know what? This is even worse. It's worse than agreeing with Jason. We've now got the situation where I have awarded the Web Planet 6.
Ooh.
So we're all within a fraction of each other, which isn't good. We need a bit more conflict, I think.
Oh, we've got some good stories coming up yet.
Definitely more conflict, especially for that level of revelation from P-Bal. Anyway, we now move swiftly, and again, the costume. You can't see this. This is like, between Eurovision acts, and they come running on and they take the stuff off and they shunt the person back on. James is now stripping. He's got literally no clothes on. Anyway, with that in mind, dear viewer, we now move on to The Crusade. Now, I don't have an original hardback for this. I've got a lovely facsimile one that's quite jaunty.
Oh, now you see, I thought you'd have the original hardback coming in here, waving the 1965 version of it around.
I could have got some tea and just given it a bit of light boxing, just so it looked like it was an original. But I don't. It's nice, lovely.
I've got to say, one of my favourite Target covers, actually, the Crusades.
Which cover?
The original cover and I'm not talking about the hardback here. The original Achilles cover, that dawned the 1973 version that was released by Target.
I wasn't being facetious, because there's a different one by Andrew Skeletor, isn't there?
Yeah, no, it's the original for me, and it's probably one of the first covers. That and the Auton Invasion, I think, are the first of the two covers I really remember from my very young days. And it was always a book that I never really got past the first couple of chapters on in my younger years, but it's actually a really, really good read when you get into it. So full marks there to that Target novel.
I'll see how far I get into it when you start scoring then.
You'll probably have a chance to read all of it.
Well, James has gone extended this week, so I might literally do half of it while you two are going on.
I was going to say, it's the first time I've had the wind-up signal from Jason.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say, James, that's probably longer than one of my even most longest roundups that I've ever done.
No,
it wasn't as boring though. I mean, we can't be that cool. It wasn't as boring.
I'm saying nothing. Okay, let's get underway with this one then. So 12th century Palestine, but this is a far more grown-up historical story for me. And this is one I really do feel quite sad that we don't have all the episodes here, because I think this story ticks the boxes for a pure historical. And it takes some pretty serious material, adds the TARDIS crew into the mix, and it comes up with what I think is, it's certainly up there as one of the top historical stories I think that the series produced. You've got some quality acting, you've got some quality guest cast, you've got the regulars on top form, you've got a really solid script here, and you've got Douglas Camfield's first story, and it's just perfect. The seriousness is played in balance with some comic relief, as opposed to the Romans, which is obviously clearly being played for comedy throughout, as we've already said in one of our other videos. But this feels like an adult type story for Doctor Who, and in complete contrast to what we've just watched with the Web Planet. So this is a story I really rate quite highly, and one that I actually, as I said, wish we had it all there, because the two audio episodes to go through to help this story, you've got to listen to the audios and watch the two remaining episodes, and we are lucky to have at least two of them. Yeah, well worth a look if you haven't seen it yet. And I love this story.
I mean, this is one that David Whittaker himself says that he's very proud of, and you can see why. I mean, he was the script editor. He left. He got asked to come back, to write this story. And you're right, it is a very grown-up story, and we've gone from the previous story, which was experimental and ambitious, to one that is very grounded in really good writing and brilliant performances from Jean Marsh, Julian Glover, the regulars. It's a really good ensemble piece set, in the 12th century. And again, it takes elements of things that historical events. It plays a little bit of artistic license with it, because the two main events that they talk about in this story happen several months apart, and they happen in quick succession in the story, but they are based on historical recollections, of what actually happened. And I think there is just a great rapport, when you see them on. I mean, I read that behind the scenes that it wasn't so good, but actually on screen though, they get on really well. The characters interplay is really good. And like you say, we've only got the two episodes. I haven't listened to the audio for the missing two. I've watched these two episodes, and they are enjoyable. Don't shake your head at me. They are enjoyable.
The clarity viewer, can we just say that it's Jason shaking his head? Because I know everyone thinks I'll be the one shaking that.
I am shaking my head because you've missed a treat by not actually taking this, I think, and doing the two stories doing the two episodes that we've got and listening to the audios to fill in the gaps in between it, because this is a story that, because it's in its historical nature and you've already got the setup and you know what the sets and the actors are looking like, this is one where you can actually go into the audios and the recon ones and actually follow it through quite well. It's a tight story. It's a good, strong 4-part story.
Or you can just wait to watch the recon on the Blu-ray.
Yeah, I'm sort of sad that that's likely to be all we'll get on the Blu-ray.
I think we've discussed the animation situation. I think I'm happy not to have to watch Joanna do that with her arms. It is interesting actually, because this is the only time this season where we have this problem where there's anything missing, and that's kind of a miracle in a lot of ways, that it's an almost entirely complete run, apart from these 2 episodes of the Crusade. And again, up until 20 years ago, 99 was, I think.
Yeah.
It was just the 1 episode, wasn't it? So thankful forever to have that extra one, which is in a terrible state, isn't it? Bless you can see it's had a rough time in the intervening years. It's got lines and but it is interesting that we've got 50% of it, but I do think it needs the other 50% somehow, and I don't quite know how to quantify it, because we've got stories with lower ratios of return that I feel happy saying this. I honestly think my score, which I'm not going to dive into, would be higher if we had the actual visual episodes for the 2 parts that are missing, and yet we have got 50% of it. So it seems really strange to be like, well, can't see the whole thing. But I think there's a lot in the 2 that we haven't got that's quite important, that we would love to be able to actually see.
Yeah, I agree. And, I would quite happily, and this is a very rare time I'd say this, but I'd quite happily hand back 2 episodes of the story that's coming next, to take these 2 episodes out of and bring these 2 back, because I think you're right. I think I've often said it, but the BBC do the historical type stories in Doctor Who really well, because they draw on, obviously a really strong wardrobe that they've got back there for the sort of historical type dramas and the period dramas that they've done over the years, and they give it a certain credibility, and the actors in this one, I think, are giving it credibility. I think it's what you just said earlier, James. Hartnell's on top, absolutely flying in this story, and I think there's a part of it that he's lifted by the quality of some of that guest cast he's got around him. So it is right. It's documented that that he and Julian didn't necessarily get on very well. But when Hartnell's playing scenes with him, particularly in that first episode, you see Hartnell's lifted his game, and it's really the 2 of them are really bouncing on screen off each other. So it's interesting. You can have stories with small casts that work well. You can have stories, and this is quite a big cast list in this one. And a lot of the people who actually, strangely, a lot of the guests who come in on this story have either already appeared in stories in season 2 or are due to appear in stories coming up in season 2. They really do draw on a whole combination of actors to come in. But that's, I think, again, part of the charm of the historical aspect of it and the part of the charm of the storytelling of it. It's quite snappy. It just keeps working time and time again throughout the story.
I mean, it's another example of Barbara being separated as well. So she escapes, and is separated from the rest of the TARDIS crew, which again is a bit of a theme from what we've looked at. But yeah, there was. I think Julian himself said that he didn't really get on with William Hartnell, said that he didn't make Jean Marsh feel particularly welcome either. But when you see them on screen together, you don't really get a sense of that because the acting is so good.
I think with Julian, it's probably that I think there was a bit of a thing that William was a little bit intimidated. People had got the theatrical background and he was a bit younger. And I think William had a lot of those sort of neuroses. So I think they manifested maybe in not a happy way. I mean, William obviously got on with Jean enough because Dalek's master plan and all that stuff, they were fine and dandy there. But I think he just had his foibles, didn't he? But I mean, on the subject of Julian and Jean, I actually think that their confrontation in episode 3 is probably the best acted thing in Doctor Who, literally 60 years. That's probably the scene. If you say, oh my, it's almost, am I going to get shot? It's almost too good to be in Doctor Who. It's incredible. And it's lost in that. It's amazing.
If you took it out, if you took that scene out and then just showed it to, random people and just said, where did you think this was? They wouldn't, I don't think they would say Doctor Who.
No. And it's absolutely, it's to the it's an incredible scene. Right? I mean, Julian gives an amazing performance throughout this, as you know, and it's very early doors of his career actually. So it's amazing to see him just powering through and having the confidence of being the lead in this. So I think guest cast. I mean, the slight elephant in the room, I guess, in the modern age, is that there are guest supporting artists who are playing parts which are probably not what we would cast them as in this day and age. I mean, it's a can of worms. It's not a can of worms. I'm going to delve deep into it. Obviously, Bernard Kay, Walter Randall. It's not how we do it now. It's how they did it then. And I think you just got to live with that now, because you're not going to remake the Crusade or change things.
I think you're right. I think you have to, but you can't take the performance away from Bernard Kay though as Saladin, because I think there's a menace in the way that he's doing it. It's a very sinister menace, but it's very underplayed. And compared to the character he played when he was back in Dalek Invasion of Earth, he's again, to me, he's on a par in this story to Julian, in the way that he's putting that performance across. They are putting performances out there, in my opinion. They are genuinely, it's like they're on stage doing like a Hamlet or something like that. They really are throwing everything into delivering against what's for me, a strong script.
I mean, the other sort of amazing thing with that is that what we've had already, so the story before we got Space Butterflies, the story before that we got a Roman comedy, story that got a Far Future. The variety each week and the different tones and style, it's still the same show every week, but what it's doing and how it's showing the storytelling, it's incredible. I mean, even at this point, there aren't many series I could necessarily call out that would have the confidence or the success to be able to do such different things, to keep coming at a different angle. I mean, yes, it's Doctor Who Rise in the TARDIS and blah, 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 but every week in this season, I mean every week as the crow flies, it is a different style and it's a different attack, but it's all trying new things. And things work, things don't work. This obviously, I think, is a slight hark back. It's in the vein of Marco Polo, I guess. Understandably, I think, given that it's David Whittaker doing it, and that's sort of his baby back in series season 1. So tonally, I think we're back. But I mean, I suppose, Monty Python aside, you're not going to do too much in the way of jokes about the Crusade, are you?
But the comic relief is in the story, though, and I think that's delivered in spades by the character that Reg Pritchard is playing, Bender here, and he pops up in 3 of the episodes, and he clearly is the comic relief without question here throughout this story.
Sorry, what was his name?
Bender here.
Oh, okay.
Bender where?
Well, I think that's how it's pronounced. But that's what I'm saying. That's the comic relief in this story. There isn't any comedy. And when you think about the way that, the Dennis Spooner script editing at this stage, he's taken the series down a slightly more comic approach. So there is more comedy in Doctor Who during this season than the previous one. This is almost, as you said quite rightly, P-Bal, a marked return back to that sort of season 1 sharpness of historical.
Great cliff. I love the cliffhanger for part 3. The only pleasure left for you is death, and death is very far away. I like that. That's a good ending. It is.
It is.
He's still on bender here, isn't he? I can tell he's not left that one behind.
I can't. I don't know what to do with it.
I think we found your new Twitter handle anyway.
Yeah.
We might possibly have, actually, yeah.
I mean, it was during the filming of this one that Verity Lambert decided she was going to step down. So there was change going on because we know that the regular cast is about to get a shake up. So it strikes me as really strange that you've got all this experimentation going on at a time when there are people saying, well, actually, I've done it for 2 years, I've had enough, and I'm going to move on now. So this is the formula that Doctor Who has retained for all that time, which is innovation and change.
Yeah, and it is change. And I think a long-running serial is inevitable. It's going to go through peaks and troughs. Any of the long-running soaps go through the same thing. There are high points in the years, there are low points in the years. And clearly, for Doctor Who to continue and to survive the way it has done, it did have to go through its own series of regenerations many, many times through the thing. And as you pass the baton over from one producer to the next, it's very obvious and very clear. And I think Verity had such a passion for the series and for what she was trying to achieve with it. And for it to go out essentially on what I think is quite a high, seasons 1 and 2, that these are high points of the Doctor Who history. And she should rightly be, and I know she was proud of the work that she did. And ultimately, testament is you get stories like the Crusade, like we've got now, and that's testament to her and the ambition I think that she did put into the series.
I think that the Daleks have become so big, if you like, on their own, and they were looking, as we just talked about in the previous story, they were looking for something to replicate that. And I guess it must have been quite difficult because they didn't necessarily want to trot out the Daleks every week, even though that might have been what the audience seemed to be clamoring for, because you had Dalek mania going on. They can still misfire with the Daleks potentially in other stories, but it's I think it's the historicals went out of fashion really quite soon, but it's a shame because there is a value to them. But I think that at this point, there's just a melting pot of things, and that's why we get all these different episodes before, some of the elements they say, well, actually, that's not as popular. But, I admire season 2 for that variety, for the comedy, for the serious drama, for the flying butterflies and weirdness and everything else, because it doesn't sit back and go, well, we've got a really great show and let's just carry on doing what we're doing. It tries to do different things. Like you say, some work better than others. And this, it is like something like the Royal Shakespeare Company is with an element of Doctor Who in it, and if you took the Doctor Who stuff out, people probably wouldn't realise that it wasn't some sort of, BBC drama from the 60s.
Series regular wise, I think we get strong from all, and William Russell gets to his heroic Sir Lancelot thing, and Barbara again gets a lot of that. The bit where she has to consider knifing Petra Markham, that's quite, that's dark. It's the storyline with Petra and George Little is beautifully played. It's quite a human element to it all. And I think William and Maureen by this point are so on song together, and there's a real affection there, and the interplay between them. And they've also got the comedy timing, the jokes about Vicky dressing up, and then the Chamberlain thinking that she's a boy, and it's just beautifully played. And I think their chemistry has really hit its stride, I think.
Yeah, what's been interesting actually as I've gone back through this rewatch of season 2 is I think again my appreciation of the way that Maureen played Vicky, and Vicky as a character she just sits in and fits in so well after Susan's departure, and it's quite quickly, she quite quickly gets the grip of the role, and apart from one or two stories that don't necessarily utilize her to her best, she's really good and she's got so much energy. And you're right, she gets on so well with Bill, and you can see that in this story in particular. And in the next one, she gets stuff to do. So yeah, I'm loving Vicky as I go back through this rewatch of season 2. Really, really good performance from Maureen O'Brien.
I liken it to when they were in the Raymonds, and it was very much her and Bill in a lot of scenes. They do fit really well, and it's not like the Doctor and Susan. She brings her own individuality to that sidekick role, if you like, because you've got Barbara and Ian off having their own adventures. Vicky does eventually, but she is a really good foil and a good energy for William Hartnell on screen.
She's got a sparkle and a wit, and I think that shines through with this. I think,
and he was too. I know he as he was getting older, he wasn't as well, but there are still moments where he just has this sort of impish smile, and you can see his delight when he's doing stuff. But then you can see his gravitas when you watch this episode, where he's really responding to the guest cast. And not playing the sort of what's a cantankerous doctory type. He's really sort of upped his game to match those that are around him.
And it's the first full serial for Douglas Campion as a director. I think he does an incredible job on this, as he does on all of his stories.
Yeah, you can see the talent shining through already at this stage, and it's an early show for him, but it's tight. Everything about this story for me on the 2 episodes that we've got, admittedly, and you're right, I think it's a shame we haven't got the other 2. It's tight all the way through.
Very fearful for Barbara and the flaming torches, though. I fear for it. a lot of spray on that booth. Do we have any exotic facts from the dark web, James?
We do, yeah. There's a whole variety of them for this story. So Michael E. Bryant arranged for 75 black ants from London Zoo for the scene where Ian is on the floor, but William Russell refused to do it. So it's actually his assistant, Victor's Ritellis, who doubled for him because he refused to lie on the floor and be covered in ants from the London Zoo. There was Bill Hartnell asked for a change to a bit of dialogue because he felt that it represented something slightly wrong in the relationship between the king and his sister. So that was something that he apparently he said he couldn't go out on a kids show. Anything else that I had? No, I think that's pretty
incest
much
and ants. That's what we're saying, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a whole variety of different facts there.
Did the ants make it back to London Zoo though, James? That's what I need to know.
I have no idea. I would assume so, because they were lent by London Zoo for the serial. But
were any of the ants brothers and sisters?
No, Bill Hartnell would have had none of that.
Not on his watch. So
he was observing, going, no, stop it.
I mean, I thought you were going to say that Julian Glover's wearing Marco Polo's costume. That's the fact of the week, surely. Shame on you, James. Get off that dark web.
It's true.
Yeah. Oh, there was one other weird one, which will probably make Jason's face go. There we go. Douglas Camfield arranged for a cow carcass on set for the zoom in shot, and apparently it was there for several days and it absolutely stank.
Did that come from London Zoo?
I Maybe they fed it to the ants. Who knows?
Where do you find some of this from?
Anyway, Lee said, soon as ended, put it in the comments below. Do we have scores for Doctor Who and the Crusade?
Yeah, I shall go first if we're following our usual pattern. Don't want to upset Jason's OCD. So, hang on, I've got 6 pages of text I want to read for this. No, this to me is a real shame that we don't have those 2 episodes, and this is probably the one that I would go and watch a telesnap reconstruction. What I really don't like watching them, but I would watch a reconstruction just for those 2 episodes, because there is such powerful acting and a great script. I did score this an 8.
An 8.
An 8, yeah.
Jason.
Very fair. Okay. I've said lots of good things about this all the way through.
Now you're going to start with the bad.
No, I'm not actually, but
I give it a 4.
I did watch the telesnaps because I wanted to be, for completeness sake, able to talk about the 4 episodes fully. Listen, this is, I think I've said all the way along, this is a tight 4-part story. I think there's great performances in this one. Interesting subject matter for a historical. It's a more adult type historical with an underlying humor just to lift it. So, we go back and we talk about the Reign of Terror that had very little humor in it, and that's partly the reason why I don't think that works as a historical. This has got everything. It's got that little bit of humor. It's got that seriousness of the story, great performances, the regulars on top form. And, you've got Douglas Camfield, you've got a tight script from David Whittaker. It's a recipe for everything that's good about it. I want those 2 episodes back. And if I had those 2 episodes, I'm really sure that this would be a 10, but I'm going to score this the best I possibly can for what is only 2 extant episodes. And I'm going to go for a 9 because I love this story.
I honestly thought you were going to say 2 then. We only have 2 episodes, so I'm going to give it a 2.
Wow. Yeah, I think I'd probably score it higher if I could see the other 2. I, have to do the audio and the telesnaps and all that stuff. I scored the Crusade. Look, I'm like the abridged version now. I scored the Crusade 7.5.
Ooh.
What? We're all within. It'd probably be an 8.5 if they could find the other 2.
There's only one other historical that I think stacks up against this one, and this is definitely in the top 2 historical stories of mine through the history of Doctor Who.
But, dear viewer, what that does mean, by the slenderest of margins, that means that we have a new season 2 leader. Crusade has edged its way into the front. Yeah, that's because there's 2 benders here. Okay, let's move on swiftly and sharply. I didn't call you a couple of Morocks, did I?
Oh no, that would be an insult.
So we now head to the Space Museum. Oh, but thankfully we're back on hardback, aren't we?
Well, I'll tell you, this is the delight. This is the highlight here coming up.
I'm sorry, Jason. You should be climbing into your Dalek at this point, shouldn't you? You've got your cosplay right there. Why are you not in your Dalek?
Can I just say, actually, the cover for this is so cheeky, because I remember seeing this in the library, vividly. Dalek and the space, like, oh my God, it's Daleks. This is exciting stuff. This is going to be a hit.
Hartnell's having a bit of a bad hair day on the front cover, isn't he?
Well, wouldn't you if you were stuck in the Space Museum?
Quite true.
So who's introducing the Space Museum?
Is it me again? Oh, Jason's nodding away. So yeah, it's all gone a bit wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. As it, we talked. Jason's face, dear viewer. We have been talking even today about the experimental side of things in this season, and we saw on Planet of the Giants that they shrunk the TARDIS and the TARDIS crew, and they had an adventure. And this time we get another sort of variation on that, where the TARDIS arrives, but they've sort of created this alternative timeline where they haven't yet arrived. So they're sort of like in parallel to the whole of the first episode is them discovering that they're in an episode, but they're not yet there. They don't arrive until the end of the first episode. It's very, very odd. So essentially they turn up, find this museum. It's all, a bit eerie. They find themselves, like some sort of collector's sort of boxes on behind a screen. They find the TARDIS, but the TARDIS is not actually there. They're able to walk through it, and then that's when start to realize that actually they've skipped ahead, and now what they're going to have to try to do for the remaining episodes is try to prevent themselves being captured and stored in the space museum. So yeah, it's again, if you think about the concept behind this one, we're now, we've gone from a historical to a really sci-fi driven story about time, funnily enough, for a time traveler.
Yes, indeed. And you're right. We're jumping time tracks all over the show here. Honestly, the setup is brilliant. If the first episode of this story sets the scene perfectly. And if it were a two-part story and we resolved that first episode with the second episode with a very quick resolution as to getting them back on track, then I think this could work as a story. But I'm afraid, dear viewer, this story quickly becomes an old relic that's destined only for the Space Museum. And I have to tell you, this is a real clunker. 2, 3, and 4. Lose them. Give me 2 episodes of the Crusade back and any one of Marco Polo, and I'd be really happy. It goes downhill pretty much from the start of episode 2. Now, I won't take away the performances of the regulars, because again, I think they are doing their very, very best through this story to lift what is a really flabby, horrible script. It just doesn't work on a number of levels, and it's not, therefore, a favorite of mine.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think some Doctor Who stories have a greater reputation because they're missing, and I think in Space Museum, it was just part 1 that existed. The other 3 were missing. People are like, oh, such an amazing setup. I'd love to see what happens later on. It sounds great on audio. It's true. The first episode is really good, and it builds to such a point, and it's an interesting thing, isn't it, that they aren't there, and then they can see that their future's going. And the peril for the rest of it is a good peril, that they know if that potentially what they're doing or what they don't do could lead to them ending up in the glass cases. So the whole thing is peppered by that turn left thing. Is it? Do we just go back in the TARDIS? Do we help the revolution? Do we not do that? And that's actually a very clever setup. Problem, I think, falls because it's so cheap. And I think whether the budget they've allotted, they've had expensive in Dalek Invasion, expensive Where Planet Crusade doesn't look too cheap though, and you've got the chase coming up. Whether the money here is like, ooh, let's try and make a few savings here, and basically have quite a drab-looking, cheap production. And it's a shame because the concept of it. And I think if you did this, and you had the big set, and you could do proper location where it was like a genuine giant museum, and there were rows and rows of exhibits. I mean, you could do it now and it would be incredible. I mean, it wouldn't be incredible because it'd be a lot of, but you could do it visually, I think, quite well now. And you could CGI a giant museum and all this. This feels like it's 3 rooms in a camper van. There's no sense of scale to it, is there? They've invaded just this tiny bit of a planet, and you get lots of talk of everyone's enslaved, but we'll see them off camera later. They're not here right now, kind of. And it's the scale of the idea is about 100 times bigger than the scale of the realization.
And therein lies the problem of the story. I think you've summed it up. Episode 1 builds really well. And then you have got like a turn left scenario, because they have to, what their actions determine whether or not they end up. But all we get is repetitive dialogue. Oh, is that the thing that causes us to be in the thing? Oh, perhaps we should just stand here and not do anything because we don't want to end up in those cases, and maybe just standing here doing nothing does that. Or we walk down there and go through that door, and maybe that does it. And it just feels like endless corridors. And I just don't understand the Zerans dynamic in trying to, they're running around with their little plans, trying to overthrow the Morocks. And there doesn't seem to be any rationale behind it either. So you've got the story bit that's not working for me around the how do we get ourselves out of this pickle of ending up in those cases, and you've got the overthrowing of the Morocks in this little part of the planet. Have they not taken over the rest of the planet? Is there nothing else on the rest of the planet other than this space museum? So many unanswered questions.
I think if you were to take out the first episode, and I'll talk about that in a second, it's a standard Doctor Who story. The TARDIS crew arrive somewhere, and there's a group of rebels that want to take their country or whatever, their planet back, and they get involved in it. And there's more definitely in this one for Vicky. She joins the rebels. She's quite bright and she gets the weapons out. The first episode, though, if you were to take like you say, if you were to lose the other episodes, I mean, there are some wonderful things about the footprints. They've got no footprints when they're walking through the snow. The bit where Vicky drops the glass and the glass rebounds, and the way they did that effect. There's lots of nice little sci-fi touches in that whole episode. And then, like you say, it's like, oh, we can't do that for the whole time, so let's bung in some other plot elements. And I find that, like you say, the sort of second guessing of, well, this could be what ends up with us being here. I think it's, for me, it feels like there's much more of that with Ian and Barbara and the Doctor, whereas Vicky's kind of like, oh, I've had enough of this. I'm going to go and do something, because everybody else is about talking about it. The 2 races, I can't really tell you much about them, because they're not really fleshed out. They're just there, and you are just told one is bad, one is good, or one is better than the other one. There's no real investiture into those 2 races. So it's kind of like, okay, have they avoided being put into the Space Museum? Yes. What about the 2 races? Who cares?
The Zerons have that bit, don't they? They basically sit down with Vicky to give some exposition as to why there are only 4 twinks running around a space museum as opposed to the whole race. There's a kind of like, what happened was we were invaded and we've all been enslaved, but we're very weak, and they've only left a couple of Morocks on the planet, but that's all they need because nobody would revolt. Which then Vicky's like, you're really pathetic. Why don't you just get the weapons? Like, oh, but it's kind of like there's like a locked door, and then she's like, show me the locked door, and they're like, oh, you won't be able to open it. And she's like, oh, for God's sake. And yeah, the lovely thing about the Zerons, they're all wearing Converse. I thought that was quite nice. They've got space Converse on.
I love the Space Converse. Now that I can cosplay.
See, there's a positive about everything in the Space Museum. I think so. I like Vicky's feistiness in that, and I think that's a nice element for that. Barbara's bit of plywood that she has to defend herself. I'm kind of like, babe, I think you do better just punching them. I don't think that plywood's going to go far. And I think Hartnell has I love Hartnell's little interaction with the mind probe thing, where he has the how do you get here and on the penny farthing and you know, you're not amphibian, and he does the little baby. That's funny, and I like all that. It's just not. I mean, I don't actually think it's awful. I think it's a little bit bland in places. I think there's some nice parts to it, and I think there's some nice ideas. But it is that thing of, I think one episode out of the 4 is really good, and I think everything that happens after the first episode is a little bit of a slow drag to get to the end.
I mean, there was supposed to be more comedy in the actual script, but some of it was removed, and I think it's not really been replaced by anything. You know, it's not been replaced by high drama or, you know, anything exciting happened. It's that I think also adds to that feeling of it being a bit bland. If there was a, you know, bit going sort of flashback to the Romans, if there was some comedy elements in it, might make it a little bit more palatable. But the removal of that the scene with you just said about Bill Hartnell was really good, but there's not much else in there.
And the direction is flat. Mervyn Pivot, it's funny because Maureen hasn't got many recollections of Doctor Who, but one of them is Mervyn's insistence on a tight foreshot. It's a very flat. I mean, there's a couple of nice close things, but as a rule, there's a lot of just everyone's in shot, it's in focus. Everyone's in shot, it's in focus, which is a shame because the little bits of visual effect which come into it, like the glass smashing and all that sort of stuff, they're nicely realised, but I don't know to what extent they're realised well because they're visual effects. They've got to be realised well rather than being directed that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Mervyn Pinfield was with the series. He's been with the series from the beginning, and I think he's an old school BBC director for sure. And you're right. You know, if you look again, if you go back to the previous story, whilst there's nothing in the way of fabulous special effects and, you know, anything to lift the story, just the sharpness of the direction of that story makes it stand out way in a head and shoulders above this one. And that's not to slate the work. It's just to say that, you know, you've got a fairly flat script here. There's not a lot of love for this story. It's on a cheap budget, and, you know, it doesn't really matter. We'll just have tight foreshots and just keep the camera work down to a minimum. So it doesn't feel like there's an awful lot of love across the board on this story.
It's interesting. Glyn Jones blames Dennis Spooner for messing with his scripts rather than it being how he envisaged it. I mean, how true anything is, I mean, you'd have to look harder into it than I'm willing to try.
I mean, there's lots of examples over the years, aren't there, of writers saying that the script editors interfered with their scripts and didn't give them what they originally wrote. But, you know, even if Dennis had inserted comedy into this one, as I think it was already said, you know, whereas there was so much comedy ramped into the Romans, you know, if you turned this into a bit of a let's play it for laughs, you know, it might have lifted the story. And I kind of agree that it would have done. And this is one where I think it could possibly have been done in that way and got away with it, because I think it's just pedestrian otherwise.
I do wonder whether or not they took that decision based, you know, we had a really serious story beforehand. Yes, we've had a comedy episode, you know, with the Romans. Maybe they thought, well, we'll focus more on the sci-fi elements, but the sci-fi elements there isn't enough of that to last the 4 episodes. You know, there could have been other elements added to it from a sci-fi time travel perspective, but there just wasn't enough of that, you know. And then to keep this dilemma going for all 4 episodes of have we made the wrong decision, I think that's just a dead end road.
This is a tight two-part. If you've written this as a two-part story or produced it as a two-part story, I think you'd have got away with it. Episode 1, keep exactly as it is. Set your scene, set your tone. Episode 2, resolve it. That's it.
We've seen stories like this before. Seen stories like this before where they know something's going to happen, and the comedy is in them trying not to let that happen, but everything that they try to do goes wrong and backfires, and they end up further towards the where they're trying to get away from. And that that could have worked a little bit, if they'd sort of like spent 2 episodes second guessing each other and then realized that actually because they were second guessing each other, it was all going belly up, and that's what was wrong.
You're reciting the plot for Doctor Who and the Eve of the Daleks, aren't you? we all know what a riot that was.
3-minute time loop.
And strangely, the whole thing at the end comes down to a faulty switch again.
Yeah. Well, these tight 40s.
I mean, to be fair, Doctor Who spends 6 weeks in Genesis asking if he's got the right to get rid of the Daleks, and people love that one, don't they?
Oh, hashtag justice for Genesis. Here we go again.
Yeah, I think as well, also, as a kid in the 90s, you must have been really miffed that you see the Dalek and then it's just a museum prop. Although you do that amazing, well, you better be thankful you don't ever meet these, Vicky. I like that that's a sort of trailer, isn't it? Into go, they'll be back in a couple of weeks, kids. Just bear with.
I love Hartnell's face though when he appears. He's got such a boyish grin on his face. It's just like, oh, really wanted to do this ever since I first saw my first Dalek.
So it's a rare ray of light in this, I think. So, do we have any exotic facts on Doctor Who and the Space Museum?
Yeah. I wish I could say I had some facts to make it more interesting. Jacqueline Hill, at this point, had decided that she was leaving. So we've had this sort of trail along the series. Budget-wise, the incidental music was all stock recording. Apparently, it was a myth that they had a lower budget, and apparently the budget was the same as some of the other episodes, but you can draw your own conclusions on that one. The Doctor gets the time-space visualizer, a neat piece of equipment, and we get to see the actual Daleks, through that. But
also it's worth mentioning that Time Space Visualizer was a series of very successful online free events from Phantom during lockdown.
We all loved the Time Space Visualizers, didn't we?
There were no Beatles or Queen Elizabeth. I mean, there were a few no Queen Elizabeth and no Beatles on there.
Oh, 10 fabulous weeks there.
But yeah, that was...
Bring on the next lockdown. Let's do it all again. No, let's not. So, do we have scores on the doors? What I will say, before we get to the scores on the doors, I'm preempting anything here, is that the Web Planet managed to just sink below Planet of Giants to be our season 2 bottom place. Is it about to, before I've even recited this, is it about to lose its bottom? Right. Who has a score for the Space Museum?
Okay, I'm just going to put it out. I'll go first on this one then, if you like. So I think you can tell that I'm not a big fan of this particular installment of Doctor Who. Good first episode, sets it up well, thrown away a little bit by some haphazardness, let's say, after that. The regulars are on fairly good form considering the material that they're working with. There's very, very little that I would find redemption in here for this. A tight 2-part, as I said, would have worked much better. It's not a highlight. It's not one I'd go back and watch time and time again. And if it weren't for the fact that it had a strong first episode and the regulars were reasonable, this would probably be getting my first 0, but it's not going to be as low as that. I'm going to be generous, and I'm going in here, Space Museum, with a very simple 2.
I love how I'm going to be very generous here. 2.
Is that Jason's first number 2?
I am not a number. I am a free man. Oh no, that's not in this series, is it?
Do your best vanilla fielding, James. Pick up the pace.
I wish that they'd either left the comedy in and turned it into like a farce where everything that they did brought them closer to being captured, you know, and played on that, and maybe then had Vicky go off with the rebels and sort of say, you know, you adults can have these conversations, but I'm going to make a difference. Because I think we've had so many stories recently up to this point where Barbara was the strong female person that's going to save the day, and I think this was a good opportunity to sort of have Vicky running against that and sort of like, yeah, I've armed the rebels and I've, you know, instigated the coup at the end, or have gone just with the sci-fi element of, you know, determinism and things like that around the alternative timelines and what, you know, what they can do to try and avoid something they've already seen. Unfortunately, it's neither of those. It falls completely in the middle of this grey expanse of, well, we've got 4 episodes to fill. I don't think it's a 2. I have scored it slightly higher at 4.
Dun, dun, dun. See, Jason's just stingy. It's very rare you can say that. Yeah, it is true. I don't think it's terrible. I think there's a lot worse out there. There's I mean, it's definitely been a lot worse since. It's just a little bit disappointing because it could have been amazing. And again, even just if some of the museum exhibits had been things they'd had to encounter or they'd come alive and they'd had a peril from that, it's just cheap. It's just cheap and flat. But it's not awful, and there's still some bits to like in it. And I said we've discussed earlier about the regulars and things like that, and the concept of the first letter. I agree with James, and I also scored it a 4.
Ooh.
Which gives the Space Museum 10 points.
It's more than I thought.
Which means, and I'm going to have to concentrate here because you know, old age and lateness. In last position currently then is the Space Museum on 10. Just above it, 16.5 is the Web Planet. 17 points for Planet of Giants. 20.5 for the Rescue. 23.5 for both Dalek Invasion of Earth and the Romans. And our current new leader on 24.5 is the Crusade.
Can you imagine if someone, you know, watches us live, just joins at the end of the recording and just hears you say that we've just scored Space Museum 10
out of 10?
Yeah. That would have got some comments underneath.
I'm a Space Museum stan. But there's 2 big hitters left, I think, at the end of this season. So it's all to play for. So if you want to know what our scores for the next 2 stories are, you'll have to like, subscribe, share. They're doing it already. At least that's what I think the hands are doing.
Share.
Yeah, I'm sharing, don't worry.
Yeah, don't share, don't overshare. I think that's a moral in life. Don't overshare, Jason. So thank you very much, gentlemen, as ever.
A pleasure as always.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you if you have stuck with us and enjoyed it. And if you haven't, write something horrible about Jason. Fix it up a bit. And we'll see you soon.